Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Clint with the Scottish Clans Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to share with you a tool online that you can use to not only study the Scottish clans, and I'm going to show you how I did that and some things that are really interesting to know, but also some things that you can take it from there, not only studying the Scottish clans, but also studying your own surname or a surname in your family tree that you're looking more into. So I think it's going to be really helpful. Another thing that I'm excited to share with you is the opportunity to plan your next trip to Scotland and to have the opportunity to be taught by one of the best tour guides in Scotland. You guessed it, Bruce Fumi. If you're listening or watching this YouTube channel, then you have probably seen some of his content with his channel, Scotland History Tours. And that's the name of the company as well. I had the opportunity to firsthand partake in his talent and his knowledge. He met me and my family at Stirling Castle a couple months ago, and it was really cool. We've been in communication for a while now, for a few years actually. And so when I was planning my trip over to Scotland, I wanted to make sure that I had the chance to at least meet him face to face. But he went beyond that. He took me and my family. Is really good with the kids. We met at Stirling Castle, and he gave us such a really cool rundown of not only events that happened there, but why they were important, historical context, things about the castle itself, its position in broader Scottish history. But then also from the castle, you can look out and see where the Battle of Stirling Bridge took place and a few other really notable parts of Scottish history. If you want to be taught by one of the best in person and you're planning your next trip to Scotland, you really need to click that email link below. Email me. They'll pick it up on their end. They'll tell you all what your options are for pricing, group size, where you want to be, all that. They'll give you all the information you need to plan your next trip to Scotland. So make sure that you take advantage of having one of the best tour guides in Scotland help you through that experience. It'll really enhance your experience, I'm very confident. So links below once again, and without any further ado, here's what I wanted to show you about studying Scottish clans in this cool online tool. I stumbled upon something years ago that I thought was really interesting in relation to Scottish clans. And it is, I have the website in front of me. It's named.publicprofiler.org. So if you want to grab that and open up another window if you're sitting at a computer, don't do this if you're driving. In fact, if you're driving, why are you listening to this? Not that maybe sometimes we don't use YouTube to just listen to. I digress. I have this named.publicprofiler.org, which is a project that has been done about the surnames in the UK. So it's unique to that. I don't know if there's something that's you can do if you've got Scandinavian heritage, something really similar in Ireland. I don't know, but I do know that this has been really interesting on the topic of Scottish clans. So here's what I'm going to do. This project here, you can just type in a name. And let's just take my last name of Edwards. I'm going to type it in, and I'm going to press go, and it will show me, well, I'll just show you, we'll just dive into it here. It'll give you a map like this. And with Edwards, it shows you that the overwhelming concentration of that last name as it occurs in the UK today is in Northern Wales. All right, so I thought, wow, we could do this with the Scottish clans. We could look at where their traditional territories were, and you have the MacDonald, which is going to be our first clan we look at, and it's going to be useful to explain what I'm doing. We're going to look at what was the traditional territory of that clan versus where is the most common occurrence of that name today, and see how similar they are. And I think in the process, we'll see varying results. We'll see the occurrence of that surname today in a very similar location, very close to where the traditional heartland of that clan was. In other cases, we'll see it move slightly to the nearest city or built-up populated area, or sometimes it's not even close. And sometimes there's actually interesting history embedded in that result. So that's what we're going to do. And I thought if I was interested in this, maybe there's somebody else out there that would be interested to see where does the current distribution of that surname today compare with the ancient clan territory, the more traditional clan territory. So here we're going to start off with Clan Donald. Clan Donald, for those of you who are new to this subject, one of the most powerful clans to have ever been in Scotland. There's other very powerful clans for sure. After they lost the lordship of the Isles in 1493. The different branches of Clan Donald, yes, they did still acknowledge their kinship with the other branches, but without that one person at the top leading them, these different branches almost like become their own clans, and they take on their own trajectory. Did they cooperate with the other branches in the future? Yeah, they did. They continued to work together in many aspects. Also, they fought with each other in some cases. Not all of them just decided to play along and go step on the party line, but here is the map that shows the various branches of Clan Donald. And if you spell, because there's so many variants of this surname, I decided to try 3 of them out. So if you spell it just the traditional way, MacDonald. By the way, in Gaelic, little side note, in Gaelic there's never this D. I don't know if somebody knows why that D or how or why that D got added on. Is it so that it can make sense and sound better in Latin documents? Maybe, I don't know. But in Gaelic, there's never the D there. Anyway, but if you use the traditional spelling, this is where most of the people in Scotland, you can see that in North and South Uist, out here in the western, in the outer Hebrides, is where overwhelmingly the highest concentration. We're still got a pretty good concentration on the Isle of Skye here, with a little cluster around the Inverness area, and then pretty thin throughout the rest of Scotland. Now, what happens if we drop the A out of Mac and otherwise keep it the same? Wow, look at that. We see it shift east dramatically. And I don't know the reason behind that. Now, I can tell you the reason of why we might find this name so prevalent here in Northern Ireland. You can see here these 2 results are different. Both with these 2 spellings, you do see a shift with a lot more numbers and a lot more people with this surname in Northern Ireland today than this here. One reason is from a very early date, clear back in the 1400s, the MacDonalds and a very powerful Norman-descended family named the Bissets, they'd intermarried, and with that marriage came lands and territories in the Glens of Antrim here in Northern Ireland. And those people who are descended from those MacDonalds tend to use this spelling here, and you can see it's minus the D, MacDonald. Also, I might add, just to be more inclusive of people who are actually part of this clan, if you say MacDonald in Gaelic, it actually sounds a little bit more like McConnell. So we just grabbed in another group, right? So anyway, these are the different spellings, and you can see the different distributions of that surname today. And so you can kind of see, with the exception of this Eastern Scotland movement here, like I said, I don't know the answer to that. I can understand why. They have a very early presence in Northern Ireland. Now, I explained the Glens of Antrim up here, but what about over here? Why do we have some this way? Well, we do have Douglase, which I've done episodes on the podcast on the Douglase between the 1200s and the late early 1600s. We see people from the Hebrides and the west coast of Scotland come down into Ireland as mercenaries, and often they're rewarded with lands. So that might explain some of these other locations. That's just a guess, though. Let's keep on going. Campbell. So we went after two of the biggest clans right off the bat. Here's a clan map right here, and you can see the Campbell clan territory. It doesn't show it up here, but they had the Campbells of Cotter were up here. We see a little bit down here with the Campbells of Loudon. Anyway, the Campbells were very powerful, a lot of territory, and that's where their traditional territories were. What about today? And we can almost say, yeah, this is it. Yeah, I can kind of see this. It just, the heartland, Argyll was the heartland for sure of the Campbells. We do see it shift south a little bit and be centered around here. This might be represented by the Campbells of Loudon. I've heard it pronounced both ways. Maybe somebody can correct me in there, straighten me out. What I think is interesting is this is not traditional Campbell territory out here, yet we do see a healthy representation of the clan on the Isle of Skye and the Outer Hebrides, Lewis, Harris, the North and South Uist, anyway, out that way. Here's another distribution map that I found in a different source that shows you that in Scotland, Campbell is still a very much West Highland and Isles name, but historically Argyll was the heartland, and I think this map makes sense to me, with minus a few of the other hot spots. We'll talk more about why some of these clans do have a hot spot in Northern Ireland. Some of you know the answer to that already. Let's keep moving. So, and by the way, for this
this is in 2 parts. And so I just took 10 clans in each one from different regions of Scotland. All right. For this one, the Gordons here, this is a cool map because I don't know how they did this, but they got that Gordon territory on there to pop. This would definitely be considered the heartland for the Gordons. The Earls of Huntly had their headquarters, their castle up here, but we do see them having a pretty good presence down here in the southwest in Galloway, and then also in the eastern borders over here. Okay, so but this is the heartland, and if we look at the distribution of the surname today, it pretty much makes sense, doesn't it? That hot spot for the current representation of that surname is exactly where we'd think it would be. Now, the Gordons were often at feud with the Forbes. And the Forbes, this is traditionally the heartland for them, for the Forbes, out here west of Aberdeen. And they are, just like the Gordons, exactly where you would think they would be as far as the hot spot, the concentration of that surname, where it occurs today. What about the Murrays? The Murrays are an interesting clan. So we're going to, just like the Gordon and the Forbes, they had something, the reason I grouped them 2 together, because they were at feud all the time. Now, these next 2 I've grouped together is not because they're always at feud, but because they had something in common, and that is that they had territory all over Scotland. And I think that's interesting to note. Where do we find the name today? So now if the Murrays have territory all over Scotland, we see a pretty broad representation of the Murrays. North and south, Northern Ireland, we have Murrays. We don't have a ton out in the Western Highlands and Isles, but it's pretty broad distribution, which matches their ancient territories here. So now this group way up here, this was a branch of the Murrays. This is just an interesting little note about the Murrays. It wasn't uncommon that a powerful clan chief would have a branch of the clan that would act as a military commander. He would train, he'd be in charge of military training, he'd be leading the troops in combat. Now, somewhere right at the front would be the chief because he's got to uphold his image and the confidence of his clan as somebody who's capable in combat. But often they had a specialist in there. For the Campbells, it was the Campbells of Auchenbreck who would provide that military wing of the clan there. For the clan Sutherland, they actually had the Murrays. Now, you'd be thinking, well, those are 2 different clans. It's not like the Campbells with the branch. Actually, the Murrays and the Sutherlands descend from the same ancestor, same kin group, and I do believe that they were aware of that common heritage. So that's these Murrays of Aberscores, way up in the north. I made that star big because those are Earls of Atholl. They did not get that earldom until the 1600s. Anyway, you see them throughout, and you see the name occurring throughout. I'm going to resist the temptation to go into a deep dive on each clan independently, but I thought I'd just make a couple of notes here and there about the different clans. So the distribution of the Murray surname, pretty close to what we'd expect it to be. Now, this is interesting. The Douglases had territory all over Scotland, and this doesn't represent at times they held possessions up here in farther north in the Murray area. But what we see here is it's a different thing. It's one thing to have ownership of land. It's another thing to have a kin base in that area, which was often a very important element to exercise effective lordship in that area. Now, in cases where a person of high rank in the Scottish world obtains lands in an area where he doesn't have a kin base, there are ways to establish that. There's one, he could give some of that land to a younger son. The main clan territory the older son might get that, or you have tanistry is going on, and I'm not going to dive too much into all that. But you can either plant your clan in that area and get it started there, or you can establish a bond with current existing clans that have been there for a long time. And it's interesting in these bonds of man-rent, bonds of friendship. I'm maybe leaning toward bonds of man-rent here. I did a whole episode on the podcast for this. Bonds of man-rent, it's interesting that they use kinship terms in many cases. So they're still using this kinship framework to establish these connections in areas where they don't have a kin base, but they have lands. So the Douglases, unlike the Murrays, both of whom have different branches of the kindred and stuff going on all over Scotland, for the Douglases, really at their heart, they were a border clan. All right, let's continue to the next one. The Camerons. Now the Camerons, we can see that here's their territory in Scotland, and that's exactly where you would expect to see the very dense concentration of the name Cameron. They didn't move too far. Now this, I was at a Scottish festival a couple years ago, and at the Cameron tent was being run by Cameron Mosier, who was representing, and he was telling me all about, he was descended from an Atholl, Atholl, for those of you who are new to the place names here, an Atholl branch of the Camerons, which I had never heard about. But isn't that interesting that right here in that region of Scotland, we do find a cluster of Camerons? So that could match up with that history that you don't hear much about for the Camerons. You never hear about this group. It's mostly all about this group. Camerons are a really interesting group, a very powerful clan, actually a confederation of clans, but that's a little bit off on a tangent. Now, sometimes we'll see throughout this is as another historical note, we'll see people gathering, what's right here? This is Inverness. What's down here? We have Glasgow. You will see these population shifts as people gather in the more populated areas, because during the industrial era, we're seeing these jobs consolidate in the bigger cities. And so you will see with some of these clans a drift to the nearest population center. And that might be a little bit what's going on here with the Camerons. The Kerrs. I had a friend in elementary school, Matt Kerr. He was a cool dude. Spent a lot of good time with him. We actually ended up moving really close to him later in my time in that town, and when I was a freshman. A lot of good time together. But he pronounced it Kerr. That's why I bring that up. Yeah, my understanding is in Britain it's more pronounced Kerr, especially in Scotland. But this is where their traditional territory was. Now look at this. Gone. We see a little bit cluster around here. I'm going to talk about this presence in Northern Ireland here in a minute. Glasgow, yep, a lot of people heading to the big cities, but look at this little cluster up here. What is going on here? I have a theory, okay? My theory is that there's a Gaelic nickname, Kerr. We see it pop up in the history of the MacDougalls with the conflict, the internal conflict within the MacDougalls. Alan of the Wood, who is an illegitimate son of the chief of the MacDougalls in the mid-1400s, and his half-brother, Ian Kerr. And I can't remember. Somebody needs to put that in the comments down there. Did that? Because it's different pausing this and going on, checking it, and coming back and resuming the recording. It's a descriptive word though. It's like a nickname, and in this case, it could have turned into a surname in this land so distant from Kerr, their homeland, their traditional territory down on the border. The Kerrs are border reavers. I did an episode on them on the podcast. Hardcore border reavers, the Kerrs. But maybe this is a completely different group and a completely different origin of that name that ends up being spelled the same because it sounds similar. Now, as we get over here to Northern Ireland, when in 1603, Queen Elizabeth dies, James VI of Scotland inherits the throne, becomes King James I of England. Still two different kingdoms, but one monarch. He didn't like this being the frontier region between two realms. He wanted this to become the middle shires. And anybody who wanted to persist in the border reaver way of life, we've got something for you, rascals. We're going to transport you over here to Northern Ireland, probably as indentured servants, or we'll kick you over to the colonies that are starting to spring up in the New World. We'll send you off as an indentured servant or as a slave or something, but we're gonna just transplant you. We're not gonna put up with any of this reaving stuff down here. So off you go. So that's a way that a lot of these people, these surnames from this part of Scotland, this border area, will become common in Northern Ireland. All right, the guns way up in the north. Look at this. This is the Clan Gun homelands, specifically right in this area right here. There's a strath that goes up. I believe that the gun chiefs were styled of Killarnan, but there's a strath, I can't remember what it's called, but it's right here. And so over here, if this is where the most guns are today, that makes a ton of sense. Shout out to the Clan Gun there. Now, you know that we're going to have McFarland representation here. For sure we are, because that's my connection to the Scottish clans, at least my strongest connection. I've got other groups back in there, but I have McFarland ancestors that settled in the Rocky Mountains in Utah, in the West Weber area in Utah in the mid 1550 or mid 15. Oh, that'd be pretty early. Mid 1850s. 1855, I believe, is when they came across. So the McFarlands, here's their territory on the northwestern shore of Loch Lomond, which we did visit a couple months ago when I took my family over there. And so this makes a ton of sense. It's not exactly where their clan territory was originally, but it makes sense that they would just drift down and settle during the industrial areas where I imagine this cluster comes from, is just moving to where the jobs were. So anyway, I don't know if that's interesting to you. I have a whole nother part 2 to this, so stay tuned for that. But I can't wait to get to that and show you about the other clans that I decided to run this little experiment with, trying to get a broader representation so that more people can feel that they're included in this. But I gave you the website, named.publicprofiler.org, if you want to go check that out. And you can see if your ancestors were close to where the traditional territory of that clan was. If I didn't get yours, then go ahead and mention mention that in the comments below. Tell me what ones you want to see that you didn't see. Stand fast. Stand by for more, another part 2 to this where more names are included, but I may or may not hit your name, so put that in the comments below. Also, if you know the reason for some of these movements of people that I didn't account for, also put that in the comments below and contribute to educating the whole group. That's what I love. I love these dialogues we can get started with these conversations here.
All right, hopefully that was useful to you, ladies and gentlemen, and you are able to not only see some really cool aspects of clan territories versus where that surname is seen today, but also maybe you've been given a tool and a platform that you can jump off of for further study. So I hope it's useful. Hopefully that was enjoyable and interesting. Please don't forget to, if you're at all considering a trip to Scotland, make sure you click that email link below and reach out to Scotland History Tours for some information and so you can work that into your plan. Thanks for joining me. Mar sin leib an drasta.